The Giant's Causeway on the coast of Northern Ireland is one of the UK's outstanding natural features. Its steep cliffs and deep bays form a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
On a cliff on the north coast of Ireland, a slab of solid basalt swung open like a door, then sealed itself shut again, leaving no crack, no seam, no proof it had ever moved. Tourists swore they saw it. Everyone else laughed because stone does not do that. But the few archaeologists who were later shown what waited on the other side stopped laughing almost at once, and not one of them will put their name to it. Because what was hidden behind Ireland's moving stone door was never meant to be found, and once you have seen it, you do not get to unsee it.
At Giant's Causeway on the northern coast of Northern Ireland, there are several hiking trails that give you great views of the stones.
The clean edge. It started with scattered clips, short, shaky, passed hand to hand between researchers and enthusiasts. At the Giant's Causeway on the north coast of Ireland, tourists and rangers swore they had watched a section of the rock face open. Not crack, not crumble. Open the way a door opens. A slab of solid basalt swinging out from the cliff as one clean piece and then settling back into the stone without leaving a mark. And then it sealed itself shut again, with no seam, no fracture, nothing at all to prove it had ever moved. And there is a reason a story like this takes hold here, of all places. The Causeway has been wrapped in legend for as long as people have lived beside it. The old story says it was not formed at all, but built, laid down stone by the giant Finn McCool, so he could cross the sea and face a rival giant waiting on the Scottish side. 40,000 basalt columns, fitted together so precisely that for centuries, people could not quite believe water and time had done it alone.
To talk about this rock formation, we need to talk a little bit about the environment in this area at the time these formed. So we're going to go back around 60 million years ago.
So, when someone says a door opened in that rock, they are not dropping the impossible into an ordinary place. They are adding one more impossible thing to a coastline that has never fully belonged to the rational world. Most people dismissed it within minutes, and honestly, you would have too. Basalt does not open. It fractures, it collapses, it weathers down over centuries into those famous columns along the coast. What it does not do is move as one solid piece and then settle back into place as if it was built to. So, the clips got waved away. A hoax, a trick of editing, the kind of thing that earns 10,000 views and then vanishes by the weekend. Kieran Orya should have been the first to laugh. He had spent 15 years on subsurface survey work in the Boyne Valley, around the passage tombs at Brunaboyne, brought in by the State Heritage Office precisely because he never overstated a finding before he left the field for good. People assumed he left for money or burnout. The truth was stranger. He had stopped enjoying the part where you find something remarkable, and then spend 3 years arguing with committees about whether you are allowed to call it remarkable. He wanted the thing itself, not the paperwork around it. Which is exactly why, years later, with no career left to protect, he was free to do what no working archaeologist ever could. He was the methodical type. Data first, always.
The lava that was erupted very, very quickly, and the flows were very, very thick.
The kind of man who measured twice and published nothing he could not defend in front of a room full of people who wanted him to be wrong. He knew exactly how a hoax like this was usually built, and exactly where to look to catch it. That was the whole problem. He looked exactly where the trick should have been, and the trick was not there. Here is what you need to understand for this to land the way it landed for him. Basalt forms when lava cools fast, and that fast cooling is what builds those tight geometric pillars at the Causeway. The geometry comes from stress. The rock contracts as it cools and tears itself into columns along lines of pressure. Think of a dried lake bed cracking under the sun. The mud shrinks and splits into neat tiles, and every tile carries the memory of how it broke in the rough, dusty edges, where it pulled away from its neighbors. Basalt does the same thing, only in stone, under heat that would vaporize you, and once it sets, those edges are permanent. They do not heal, they do not smooth themselves out. So, when a piece of basalt moves, any piece for any reason, it has to leave a trail. Crushed dust where it ground against its neighbor. Microfractures spidering along the break. A seam where two stone faces dragged across each other. There is always something. Rock does not move in silence and leave no evidence. The physics will not allow it. In that footage, there was nothing. No crumbling, no falling debris, no distortion. In the surrounding stone, Just a controlled shift and then stillness, as if the rock had been engineered to perform that one motion and nothing else. He went through it frame by frame, hunting for the cut, the compression artifact, the shadow pretending to be a moving edge. The longer he looked, the worse it got, because careful looking is supposed to expose the lie.
The Giant's Causeway itself has really attracted visitors since the 18th century, and it's all down to a Dublin watercolourist called Susanna.
Here, it only kept proving how few lies there were to find. That is the moment a man who had never once chased a fringe theory in his life packed a bag, told no one where he was going, and drove to that coastline alone. Finding the weakness, he did not try to breach the visible face of the cliff where the movement happened. That is the obvious move, and it would have been close to impossible. Basalt that thick resists direct drilling for hours, maybe days, and forcing through it risks bringing the whole face down on top of you. So, he did not go looking for the door, he went looking for weakness. Because basalt does not cool evenly. As the lava sets, it contracts, leaving pockets of different density and hidden stress that shift from one section of cliff to the next. You cannot see any of it from the surface, but a man trained to read grain orientation and fracture alignment can feel where the rock is thinner, where it would rather give than fight. So, that is what he did, for hours, with his bare hands. No scanners, no radar, just touch, and the way the surface caught the late afternoon light. He traced faint shifts in texture until he found a single spot, not against the door itself, but right beside it. Close enough that if anything ran behind that slab, parallel to the cliff, a narrow bore would punch straight into it. If you are already leaning in, do me one quick favor before this goes where it goes. Hit subscribe. A huge number of people watching right now haven't. And these are exactly the kinds of stories that get buried the moment a channel like this one stops surfacing them. It costs nothing, it takes 1 second, and it makes sure that the next door we open finds you too. He had done this 1,000 times in his old life, reading a drill the way a doctor reads a pulse. The bit tells you everything if you know how to listen. The pitch of the grind, the heat coming back up the shaft, the grade of the dust, all of it maps the rock you cannot see. The first layer behaved exactly as it should, dense, unyielding.
Insomuch as there are similar geological features here as there are on the west coast of Scotland, because this whole area is subject to the same type of volcanic activity.
The resistance pushed back through the tool with a steady, predictable force. Textbook solid volcanic rock. He worked it slow, holding pressure, easing off whenever the bit ran hot. The most reassuring sound in the world to a man who wanted, more than he would admit, to be proven wrong. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Nothing changed until it did, and it did not change gradually. There was no warning. One moment, the bit was grinding through solid stone. The next, it was grinding through nothing at all. The resistance dropped instantly and completely. The force he had been bracing his whole body against simply vanished, and the bit lurched forward several inches before he could stop it. The feedback through the tool went from a dense, heavy grind to something hollow, empty, open. He killed the power and froze with the bit exactly where it was. And in that silence, before he had seen a single image of what waited on the other side, a careful man already understood he had opened something that was never meant to be opened. He sat with his back against the cliff for a while before he moved again. There was no undoing it now. The hole was open. The only question left was whether to look, sending it in. He did not widen the hole, not yet. First, he listened. And this is the part that should bother you the way it bothered him. No airflow moved through the opening, no echo came back, no sound of anything shifting on the other side. Whatever was back there, it was sealed. A natural cavity in coastal basalt is almost never truly sealed. Water finds its way in. Air moves through it. Given enough time, the sea works into every weakness it can reach, because that is what the sea does, relentlessly, for as long as the rock exists. A space that had stayed closed tightly enough that not one breath of air stirred when he punched through, is not a space that nature left alone. It is a space that something kept closed, which meant whatever was inside had not seeped in over the centuries. It had either always been there, sealed from the beginning, or it had been put there and then sealed in on purpose. Only then did he widen the opening, carefully, just enough to feed a machine through. Because whatever was on the other side of that wall, he had already decided one thing. He was not going in after it himself. He fed a small tracked crawler through the gap, A camera on treads, low to the ground, its own lights on the front. He let the lens settle, and then he sent it forward into the dark, the way you lower something into deep water when you have no idea what is down there. The first stretch was almost ordinary, rough basalt, the kind you would expect just inside any cavity. But the floor under the crawler was wrong in a quiet way. It was level. Unnaturally level compared to the broken rock back at the entry point, as if something had once flattened it on purpose. And keep the door in your mind as the crawler moves, because everything the camera is about to find sits parallel to it.
Connachys were the gatekeepers of the Causeway going a way back. There's two families that were really interconnected with the site.
In some sense, all of it is on the other side of the door. People swore they watched open. Then the lights found the first of the shapes, and ordinary was over. They were hanging. Suspended from somewhere above, in a loose cluster, dull-surfaced, drinking the light instead of throwing it back. And they would not hold still. There was a barely perceptible shift to them, as if their position was not entirely fixed, even though nothing in that dead sealed space should have been moving them at all. Sit with that for a second, because Orya did. Something was hanging in a chamber no air could reach, and it would not stay still. The light in the dark. He pushed the crawler deeper, and the floor changed under it. The unnatural flatness gave way to a thin layer of liquid pooling in the low spots, dark, almost black under direct light. There was no flow to it, no source feeding it, no direction. It just gathered and stayed, held by the shape of the ground, and it rippled. Even when the crawler sat completely still, the reflections moved, which meant one of two things. Either the liquid was not still, or the surface underneath it was not stable. He never figured out what the liquid was, and he is careful to say so. It could have been groundwater that found its way in through a fault too fine to see, mineral heavy, stained dark by whatever it passed through on the way down. That is the boring answer, and he badly wants the boring answer to be true. But the boring answer does not explain how it came to be pooling in a room that not one breath of air could enter. A room the sea, in 60 million years, had somehow never once managed to reach. Whatever it was, it had been locked in there with the door the entire time. Then the camera tilted up, and Orya saw the thing he could not explain away. There were structures embedded in the ceiling, not hanging like the shapes, not protruding, integrated into the rock, running horizontally across the space, like beams half swallowed by the stone. Not one beam, but a series of them, marching back into the dark at intervals he could have set a ruler against. And here is what his training would not let him dismiss. Volcanic rock has rules. It cools, it contracts, it cracks along predictable lines. Nothing in those rules produces evenly spaced horizontal beams holding a straight line through curving stone. You can find geometry in basalt. The columns prove that. But it is the geometry of stress and cooling, never the geometry of intent. This was the second kind. The spacing was measured, consistent.
The legend says that the great giant Finn McCool built this causeway across to Scotland to fight with one of his great rivals.
And it mirrored the spacing of the hanging shapes exactly, which meant the two were connected, anchored to the same thing running through the ceiling. If this corridor ran parallel to that stone door, then the door was not the entrance to a hollow. It was the entrance to this. The crawler pushed on beneath the beams. 10 meters from the entry point. 15. And the deeper it went, the worse the signal got. Static began crawling across the feed, the image distorting and recovering and distorting again. As if the chamber itself did not want the machine going any further. Condensation gathered on the lens. Orya was reading shape and motion now, instead of detail. He almost missed what happened next. A flare of light. Ahead, just past the edge of the frame, brighter than the crawler's own lamps. A sudden bloom that bounced off the moisture in the air and washed across the lens, and then it was gone. No source, no lingering glow. Nothing left to explain it. He stopped, held position, waited, nothing. So he scrubbed back through the feed and isolated the frames, and there it was, consistent across every one of them. Not a glitch, not a reflection off the crawler, something external, something inside that sealed chamber, in the dark, that had produced its own light. Sit with the arithmetic of that for a second. A sealed space, no air, no way in or out except a slab of rock that moves on its own. And something still in there, after all this time, capable of making light. And here is the detail he could not shake afterward. He was now driving his only camera straight toward whatever had made it. He pushed forward, slow, toward the spot where the light had been. The ground got worse. The tracks began to struggle, working harder for every inch, the soft surface bleeding away traction. At roughly 20 meters in, the crawler stopped, and it did not stop because he chose to. It lost traction completely. The track spun, displacing the surface layer without carrying the unit forward, and the interference climbed to the point where losing the feed entirely became a real risk. He had a choice in that moment, and some part of him knew it. The light had come from just ahead. A few more meters might have put it inside the frame, might have answered the only question that actually mattered, but the crawler was his single thread back to the surface, his one set of borrowed eyes, and if it died down there, he would be left standing alone at a sealed cliff with no proof of anything and a hole in the rock he could never explain to anyone. So, the decision when it finally came was not really about the machine at all. He held position. He tried small adjustments. Nothing improved, so he made the call and started bringing the crawler back. He told himself it was practical. The unit was stuck, the signal was failing. Pushing further risked losing the machine. All of that was true.
Cracks in the Earth's crust, lava starts to pour out. It allows it to form into very regular shapes, and the reason it forms into...
But there is a difference between a machine that cannot go forward and an operator who has stopped wanting it to. He had come to prove the space was empty. By the time the tracks gave out, that was over. He was not trying to prove anything anymore. He was trying to leave. What he sealed. The crawler retraced its path. The shapes came back into frame as it passed, hanging exactly where they had been, except, again, not quite where they had been. Then the narrow opening reappeared, faint daylight bleeding into the frame, and it was back in open air. But the thing it had filmed was still in there, and the door was still out there. He did not send it back. He pulled his equipment and sealed the opening cleanly, so that from the outside there was no fracture line, no debris, no trace of a drill. The cliff looked exactly as untouched as the day he arrived. He sealed it the way you close a door you were never sure you should have opened. And the stone door, the thing that started all of this, has not been recorded opening since. He drove home with the footage and did not load it again for weeks. Some part of him hoped that if he left it alone long enough, it would turn out to be nothing. The way everything in his career had eventually turned out to be something ordinary, it did not. There is no official record of any of this. No documentation, no published findings, no institution anywhere that will admit the space exists. There is only the footage and the account of one man who mapped the rock with his own hands and sent a camera into whatever was waiting behind it. The others who looked. Eventually, he showed it to two people he trusted. Dervla, who had run excavations alongside him for a decade, and Tom, a structural surveyor who had spent his entire career explaining exactly how and why stone fails. Two people whose whole profession was finding the dull, ordinary answer that everyone else had missed. He watched them at the screen instead of watching the footage, because he already knew what the footage held. He watched the moment the ceiling beams came into frame. Dervla went quiet, the kind of quiet that is not calm. Tom made him play it again, and then a third time, slower, hunting for the seam, the cut, the natural explanation. Exactly the way Orya himself had. He kept circling the same impossible detail. Load-bearing members set at even intervals do not occur in basalt, because basalt forms by cracking, and cracking does not measure. Dervla kept circling the door, the sheer mechanics of a slab, that heavy moving as one piece and resealing without a seam. And every thread she pulled led back to the same place Tom's did. Neither of them found a way out of it, and by the end, neither of them would say out loud what the spacing of those beams meant, because saying it meant saying that something had built a room inside solid volcanic rock and sealed it behind a door that opens on its own. 3 trained people have now sat in front of that footage. 3 people whose entire working lives were spent talking everyone else down from exactly this kind of conclusion. Not one of them can give you the ordinary answer. That is what shocked them, and it is the part that should sit with you longest. Not a viral clip, not a rumor passed between strangers online. 3 careful professionals who looked as hard as it is possible to look, and came away unable to explain a single frame. What do you do with something like that? That was the question that pulled the 3 of them in different directions for a while. Tom wanted to take it to someone official, to force the question into the open where it could be tested properly. Dervla wanted it buried, the opening forgotten, the footage gone, because some doors, once you have seen what is behind them, you do not get to unsee. And Orya, the careful one, the one who measured twice, found himself unable to choose. He had spent his whole life believing the right response to a mystery was to investigate it. Now he had investigated one, and the investigating had only made it worse. In the end, the three of them did the most human thing imaginable: nothing. The footage sits where Orya put it. The opening stays sealed. They check in with each other now and then, not to plan anything, just to confirm that they all still remember it the same way, that none of them has quietly talked himself into believing it was a trick of tired eyes. And every so often, late at night, one of them sends the others a single short message asking the same question: has the door moved again? So far, every time, the answer has come back no. That is the thing the footage leaves you holding. Not a hollow, not a natural void carved out by ordinary geology over millions of years. Evenly spaced beams, set with intent, hidden inside the cliff the entire time, with one moving slab of basalt as the only way in or out. Orya hedged on everything he could not be sure of: the distances, the liquid, the light. But there was one word he never used for any of it, not once. He never called it natural. And if the corridor he reached is only one passage running alongside something larger, then whatever is behind that stone door still has not been fully seen by anyone alive, and the few who have come closest cannot bring themselves to describe it. And here is what keeps pulling Orya back to the screen at 2 in the morning. If something built that chamber, it did not build it last year. The basalt at the Causeway is roughly 60 million years old, poured out when the Atlantic itself was still tearing open. Whatever is sealed in there has been sealed for a stretch of time the human mind is not really built to hold. It was there before there were people to wonder about it. It was there before the coastline had the shape it has now. And the only thing that has ever connected it to the outside world is a single slab of rock that, for reasons no one can explain, decided one afternoon to open while a handful of startled tourists happened to be standing close enough to see. If you made it all the way here, I want to hear it from you. Do you think Kieran Orya drilled into something that was built, or is there an explanation the geology can still account for? Drop it in the comments because I read them, and the best theories on this channel almost always come from you. And if this one got under your skin even a little, subscribe and stay close. The next door is always nearer than it looks.